Hello. Thank you for joining me today. I wanted to talk about ServiceNow development and where we're at today with it. It's gone through many iterations over time, and now is some of the most impactful times we've been in being able to create scalable and testable applications on the ServiceNow platform. And so I wanted to bring as much together as possible here, show you how you can use the tools that we have now to do day-to-day development, work with teams, and work with traditional software engineering tools such as source control, Git, as well as testing, both unit testing, integration testing, how you can build the most robust applications possible. So why should you even listen to me? My name is Chris Nanda. I've been in the ecosystem for ServiceNow for about 16 years now. Traditional software engineering background, computer science, and all of that jazz. I worked at ServiceNow for 5 years in engineering. I got to help start customer success, now the Impact program. I was hired to design the vulnerability integration framework, which was based off of previous designs that I had done before I worked at ServiceNow. And then also I had the opportunity to work on restricted caller access. That was a really fun one, and that's actually where we're going to start today, because I focus on scoped applications. Development on the platform has come a long way, and scoped applications have been around for over 10 years now. I've been building applications on the platform for over 10 years, but I think scoped applications allow us to get that functionality that we want with also compartmentalizing our functionality, so that way we can make it scalable across a team and also make it so that way it's trackable. What changes did we make? What are we doing right now? How are we doing it? And all of those other questions that you have when you're building large scale software applications. Because that's realistically what we're doing here. When you're using ServiceNow, this is not an implementation. It's a software platform that we can build upon, and it is a software application that we are building. It just happens to be on a platform that allows that to be a little bit easier. With that, I'm going to talk about cross-scope privilege first, because this is actually something that almost everyone, when I talk about scoped applications, has an issue with. And you may not totally understand this term or recognize runtime access tracking, but you've probably heard the name cross-scope privilege or seen some errors according to that. Now again, today I'm focusing on development in the platform and developing your own scoped applications, but some of this content can be taken outside of that. And so one of the key things here is runtime access tracking, or cross-scope privilege, was designed in order to be able to track what a scoped application is calling out to. So if I'm creating a scoped application and I want to use cross-scope privilege is designed to track the things that my scoped application is trying to access in another scoped application or in global. And this is a key thing to understand, because this information can be taken to other areas such as ServiceNow created scoped applications, which is probably where you see most of the errors that you've hit in the past. But basically it's saying that if runtime access tracking is turned on for a scoped application, then a cross-scope privilege record needs to exist in that scoped application. So in this diagram, in the My Scoped Application app, if I had runtime access tracking turned on, cross-scope privileges defined for the My Tasks table in the another scoped application in this diagram. And so realistically, this is controlling and auditing basically what my scoped application is calling out to. Now, why does this exist? Why do you need to know what your scoped application is calling out to, and what are the headaches around that? This was designed when the ServiceNow store was coming around. When you're downloading an app from the store, especially from a third-party vendor, also from ServiceNow themselves, you want to be able to know what that scoped application is going to be accessing. Let's say it wants to access your HR app, and it's another application. So that allows you to see those cross-scope privileges and define whether or not you're going to allow that scoped application that you're installing to access other things on your platform. And that's why this was created. But runtime access tracking is turned on by default when you create a new scoped application. And this can be kind of frustrating, because realistically, what does this give you? Well, if you're in an industry that is heavily regulated and you need that auditing to know, all right, my new scoped application that I'm creating is accessing this other data somewhere else on my own platform, if you absolutely need that, then you can leave this on and you're just going to have a little bit more testing to do. But I'll say 90% of the scoped applications that I've built for customers that are just going to be on that customer instance, I turn runtime access tracking off, because there's really no need to be able to say my scoped application is accessing this other data and being able to say yes it can or no it can't. So that being said, in running through what I'm going to be talking about today, I've created an app, and you'll see me create another one and turn off runtime access tracking. So you can see here that I've turned off runtime access tracking on the scoped application record. And what this is going to be allowing me to do is that I no longer have to worry about what my app is calling out to. It just makes my life a little bit easier in that way. So now that we have that out of the way, I'm going to walk you through exactly how I go and create a new scoped application. We're going to talk a lot about the ServiceNow SDK and why it's useful, what it can do for us, but also we're going to focus on real life scenarios, creating that scoped application, how I can develop in it, how I can use the SDK to pull my changes and store those in Git and things like that. And also I'm going to show you how you can incrementally start using the SDK, because I feel it's an amazing tool that it can be a little overwhelming. So let's go ahead and get to it. All right, so I'm going to be using PDIs from ServiceNow's developer portal for these demos today. This is a fairly new PDI. I just spun it up this morning. I do have an app in here already that we can use as a legacy app, as we call them, when using the SDK. But I want to walk through what do I do when I'm creating a new scoped application. Now, from the home page here, I'm going to start off and say, okay, I want to create something. Now, I am very traditional, and so there are a lot of different ways to do everything. You may want to do it in ServiceNow Studio, you may use App Engine Studio, whatever it is, creating an app, you can do it in whatever means you want. So I'm going to click on the application icon up here, and then you can see I had that other one selected already. I'm going to go back to global. And then I'm going to select on this. So you have your update set picker and your application scope picker. My easiest way of creating a new scoped app is by coming into the application picker and clicking on this open list button at the top. And these are all the applications, both custom applications that are created on this instance, as well as store applications that have been installed. But I'm going to go ahead and just click on my new button. I'm going to create from scratch, because I personally like to start off with nothing in my app. And I'm going to create this. I'm going to say this is going to be an SDK test application. And it's automatically going to create my scope name for me there, and that's okay. And I'm going to click OK. It's going to go through that process. Then it's going to give me the option to edit this. This is still going to open the traditional studio in ServiceNow. Now I've got a blank application. I can add whatever I need to it. But like I said, one of the first things I always do is I turn off runtime access tracking. That will just make my life a little bit easier. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I go up to File, Settings, which is going to open my application definition. I'm going to change this from tracking by default to none. What I will tell you is if you are in one of those industries that does need this, tracking is good. It will automatically create those cross-scope privileges for you as you access other things within the platform. But as we get later in our development process, you're going to want to test in enforcing, because that's going to give you the most realistic ability to make sure that you have all those cross-scope privileges. So that way when you publish this application or you install it on your test or your production instance, you have a high degree of confidence that all of the cross-scope privileges that you need are currently there. But for today's need, we're going to turn it off. Now I don't need to worry about that anymore. Okay, so that's one of the first things that I do. Then I can go ahead and create whatever I need. I can click on Create Application File up here, and this allows me to create any of the pieces that I need. Traditionally, one of the first things I'm going to need is a table, so I'm going to select that and create it. We're going to call this a to-do table, test to-do. We're going to extend task. And then we're going to go ahead and click Submit. What that's going to do is it's going to create a table for us. It's going to create a module as well as an application menu. So now we see we have some navigation items over here, access controls, roles, all of that stuff. Now I can go through and minimize each of these, but when you get to a fairly large application and you first open it, I tend to just click on this, which will minimize all of them. But then the next thing I'm going to want to create is a script include. So how do I access that table, right? To-do helper. All right. Now I have the basis for my scoped application. So this is one way of creating that scoped application. But for me, I want to be able to now save this. I want to transition my source of truth from my ServiceNow PDI instance to somewhere else, maybe Git, right? So one of the things I'm going to need is the sysid of this scoped app. So I'm going to open up that settings scoped application definition file. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to Visual Studio Code. What you see right here is a blank folder. So I have a folder created on my file system. I have nothing in it at all right now. And so how am I going to go ahead and do this? Well, first off, I'm not going to go through the installation process of the Now SDK. It's fairly simple. It's an NPM package, so you need to set up Node.js, you need to make sure you have NPM, and then you can install the Now SDK globally if you want. But I already have that installed, so I can see Now SDK --version, and it should give me the version of the SDK that I've installed, which I have the most recent one, 3.0.1. Okay? What I'm going to do is I'm going to type Now SDK init --from. What this is going to say is an SDK app, at it boiled down completely, is a NPM package. It's a JavaScript application. It just happens to be for ServiceNow and using their SDK that gets generated from. So now I'm going to go back over to my application and I'm going to copy that sysid. I'm going to paste it here. Now in the setup of the Now SDK, you need to add your authorization and all of that stuff. Again, not going to go through that whole process right now. I'll do another setup video, but we're going to just assume you already have that set up. One of the things that you can do, so the Now SDK, when you first set up your first authentication configuration, it'll set that as your default. I tend to zero that out basically because I don't like to use a default just in case I accidentally do some commands or whatnot that I don't want it to hit a particular instance. So I'm going to do --auth here, and then I always name my auth aliases after the instance name. So I'm going to do that. And so what this is going to do is it's saying Now SDK initialize. I want to initialize a new SDK project, but I want to use a scoped application that I've already created, this one, and it's going to be pulled from this instance. We're going to hit enter. It's going to ask me, okay, well, what do I want to name the NPM package? This can be really anything you want. It's going to be based off of the NPM package naming scheme. I usually just do some hyphenated name. So in this case, it's going to be like test SDK. Then it's going to log in. It's going to download all of that. And here's the key thing. If you look up here, it created was a metadata folder and some other files that can be used. This is key because a lot of people seem to assume that the SDK, you have to be using the new ServiceNow Fluent domain language and all of that stuff. You don't. That's one of the really nice things about this. If you are using scoped applications in your instance, or if you're not and want to, you can go through this same process. There's nothing stopping you. And then you can use the SDK basically just as a storage device and a deployment device. And I'll show that in just a second. I actually have a second PDI set up so that way I can push to it. But now you can see here that I've got my metadata, I've got all of this, so I can do ls. So I've got my now config JSON, package JSON. Now config, fairly simple. It's just my name, the name of the actual app, the scope ID of that app, and the scope name. In my metadata folder, I've got my dictionary and my update. You might recognize this a little bit because of the fact that it looks very close to what the legacy Git integration for Studio and whatnot kind of saved. But right now, everything that I have is in XML. We'll talk a little bit about that later in this video or in a future video. But XML is perfectly valid to be able to use with the SDK. It just isn't the best when I want to be able to do a peer review of a particular change. But that's okay. We'll get there. But now I just want to be able to make sure that over time my application is going to be stored in Git. And so what I'm going to do is a git init. Now I've initialized an empty Git repository. So then I'm going to hop over into GitHub. I'm going to create myself a new demo application. So demo SDK app. I'm going to make this public because I'll share this with everyone after we're done. And I'm going to go ahead and create that repository. All right, then we already know that we did our init, so I'm going to just start copying over each of these. So I'm going to go ahead and create my README. I'm going to add, well, instead of adding just the README, I'm going to do git add star. Now, one of the things you can see, the nice thing is the Now SDK automatically creates my git ignore, so it's going to keep all the gunk that I don't really want out of here. So I can do git add star and do a git status, git add.eslints, git add.gitignore, add.vscode. All right, then we're going to go ahead and commit it as our first commit, just like this. Add it to our branch main, and then we're going to add our remote. And then finally, we are going to push to that remote. Now, you'll already have to have your authentication set up for GitHub and all of that stuff, so that's a little outside the realm of this discussion. But now, if I refresh this page, I should see my first commit. There we go. So now all of my metadata is in here. And you may not be wowed by this because it looks a lot like what was on the traditional Git integration with Studio source control. But now we can use this and pull from GitHub and use the SDK to push it to any instance. So that is the key feature here. Or one of the key features here. So I have another ServiceNow instance. This is 312.122. And I'm going to copy that name because, like I said, I just name all of my aliases that. So what we're going to do here, one of the things we haven't done yet is do an npm initialize or an npm install. So we don't have any node modules here. So we're going to do an npmi, which should generate and download any node modules that we have. We haven't added anything extra, but in the package JSON, there are a couple defaults that the Now SDK adds. So we need to do that before we're able to build our application. Now, this is one of the interesting things. We have our metadata, and instead of that metadata just by itself getting pushed to the instance, we do a Now SDK build, which then takes that metadata. If we're using Fluent, if we're using JEST modules, which we'll talk about in a little bit, then it'll package all of that stuff up for us and put it into a zip file. Then we can do a Now SDK install, which will install it on a ServiceNow instance. We did that, so now I can do Now SDK build. I'm using the SDK commands directly, but you can also use npm run scripts, which are in your package JSON by default. Build, deploy, transform, and types is here by default, and you can always add your own, which we'll get into that in another video because it's a little bit more in depth. All right, so now you can see single artifact emitted. It created a zip file for us. We can look up here and see in our target, we've got a zip file here. And what's going to happen is basically when we run the install command, it's going to push that zip up to an instance and install it. And so now I am going to do Now SDK install --auth, and I'm going to copy that name and hit enter. So I had to add those credentials in because I hadn't done that for that particular PDI. So now I can try this again and we can install that application. One of the things I want to show you here is that I was able to pull my application from one instance, store it in Git, and then push it to a different instance. So you could push it to your test instance. So within seconds, I could download, build, and push to any number of different instances that I wanted. And scaling this up, my team that I work on, we actually have GitHub Actions doing those builds for us now, and even being able to deploy those to an instance that we have and then run tests on that instance as we see fit. So really giving you that true software engineering process that most engineers are kind of used to. And it's bit by bit, so there's nothing extra that we're doing here for using Fluent or anything like that. It is just I create my application, I use my application, and then I'm able to pull that down, store it in Git. Now, okay, so we've stored it in Git, some things are in there. Now let's go ahead and actually make a change. So I'm going to go back over here, I'm going to go to Studio, and I'm going to say, okay, let's update our script include. Get to-dos. Okay, and then we're going to grab our table name and save that. I just made an update. It's in my instance. Sorry, this is a fairly common thing. It did save it, fortunately. It just kind of goes to a blank page. So we have our update here, but now what do I do? How do I get that back down to into Git? Well, we do a transform. So now what I can do is SDK transform --auth, grab my correct alias that I'm working with for whatever my instance name is, and what will happen is now it will download the changes that have been made on that instance. And so this is really nice because what this allows me to do is incrementally store the changes that are going on. And so if we want, then we can install those, reinstall them, branch them, and make changes in a different branch. That way, if your one teammate is working on something, but you don't necessarily want to push that up to your test environment yet, you can branch that off and then do a build without those components and push that up to your test environment. Now you will see here there are some things going on with the SDK right now. This is a known bug. It generated a Fluent file for me here for my table. Fortunately, it will ignore this because that same table is already defined in XML here. I've already filed this bug with the SDK engineering team, but again, it's ignored. So I'm actually going to go ahead and just delete it because I don't want to use Fluent yet, right? So now what we can see is git status. And we see, okay, our package inventory was updated. That's okay. Sysapp was updated. And our source was updated. It helps when you're editing the right application. I had created an application earlier to test this out, and I added our code to the wrong application file. So now we have to-do helper, and it has our new function. I was just able to do a transform running this, and now we can see that our git status, we have a change to that file. And so now if I look through here, we can see Script Include was updated, and I can look over here in VS Code and see what were the changes, open changes, and now we can see that was updated. Now, as I mentioned before, comparing XML files is not all that great. It is doable, and if that's what your team wants to do over time, instead of adopting Fluent or anything like that, that's okay. But the nice thing is you can adopt Fluent as partial updates. So let's say for my script includes, which are larger scripts potentially, I want to be able to more easily compare those and know that they're working, or even more so, I want to be able to unit test them. Well, what I can do is I can create a new folder in my project called incoming. Now I will usually go into my git ignore and add that to be ignored, so that way it won't try to add that to git. And I can cut my script include from here and put it in that incoming folder. And what I can do then is use the same command, the transform command, now SDA transform --from /incoming. And what this is going to do is it is just going to transform that one file into Fluent for me. Now, the nice thing is it will remove that from the incoming folder. If it was able to transform it, it'll leave it if it's not for some reason. But we can see here now I have syscript include as a Fluent file. Now, don't get overwhelmed by the idea of using, quote unquote, this Fluent language. It's actually a simpler way of defining metadata artifacts within ServiceNow. And one of the key things about this is because of the fact that how the XML is handled over time is so ingrained into the platform, ServiceNow couldn't go changing how that was generated and what that looks like. And so it's actually easier to do this locally. One of the key things about this, though, is this Fluent file never goes anywhere. When I do a build right now, it will take this Fluent file, let's look at our update. There's no more script includes in here, right? What it's going to do is now SDK build. It is going to look at that Fluent, look at our metadata, take the Fluent and turn it into XML locally right here on my machine, and then build that target zip file just the same as it did before. And so we can actually see what it built. So this is the zip output, but it actually created a dist folder up here, and we can look in our update and see here I do have a SYS script include, which was generated from that Fluent file. So this is one of the nice things. That Fluent file never goes anywhere. It is only local using the SDK to convert that from that domain-specific language into the XML that the platform needs. It is just a nice way for us to be able to compare things and store things in Git. So here, git status. Okay, now we see that we deleted the script include and we have our source folder here. So I'm going to go ahead and git add -u, which is going to remove the deleted file. It's going to add the other ones. Git status, git add source, git add package lock. All right, now we're good to go here. Git commit -m updated script include and converted to Fluent. All right, now I'm going to go ahead and push this. So now we can see those commits over here in our app. We can see the most recent one, updated script include and converted to Fluent. We now have our source Fluent generated folder here, which has that script include in it. We can see the commit and see what changes were done in that commit, the removal of that script include from the metadata folder. See that it was deleted here. We can see that this was created. And now, this is one of the really nice things. I don't have to go to using JEST modules in order to get some really nice benefits out of this, because this is still a little terse, having a script field in here with the rest of the definition of my script include record. And right now, this is going to be a little opinionated. Myself and my team, we just do this as our own structure. You can do it however you feel your team wants it. But we're going to remove this from this file and make it its own JS file now. And for that, just as a naming scheme for us, we create an includes folder under the source folder. And I like to put things still in their named folder with their named objects. So we're going to do SYS script include. Then I am going to take to-do helper, and I'm going to create a new file in here called to-do helper. .server.js. Then I'm going to copy or cut the entire script out of here. I like to cut just to make sure I got everything, lets me see what I'm changing, and paste it into here. And then I'm going to go back over here. I'm going to do now.include // includes SYS script include to-do helper server.js. And you notice I got some pretty nice IntelliSense there, so it kind of showed me what my file system looked like. So it's really nice as a helper. But now I have an actual JS file here that I can store in Git. This is one of the huge issues that using like the VS Code extension that ServiceNow put out years ago. It had such state management within the extension itself that you couldn't really rehydrate that project from Git. So you couldn't store everything within Git from those JS files. And so now we have this, so I can do git status, git add star, git status. Now I've got both of those, my modified file and my new file. Git commit updated script include to server.js file. Git push. Just to show you, now SDK build. So we will still get that same output. So now it's kind of going through a couple of steps. It's going to combine that include into that Fluent file for us. Then it's going to build that into our XML. And I can go up to our dist here and update and still see that our script include is exactly how we had it. But now, as I make changes to this file, first off, it's a lot easier to look at a JS file without having to worry about the rest of the information in there. I can go ahead and do this. Update to do. Get some nice IntelliSense, which is nice. And even all of that. So basically I can get that, I can do a set value of that field and that value, and then update it. And now we can build. We can look at our dist again, see that that script include was updated, so it's got my update to do function in there. I'm going to go ahead now. Different people have different views on this. I can go ahead and add this to Git now, or I can add it to Git after I've tested it on the instance. I'm going to go ahead and push it to the instance now just to see and make sure that everything looks good. So we're going to do this, grab my instance name. And again, there is a default scheme that you can set up within the Now SDK. So you don't always have to do the --auth. It's really up to you, but I like to do it because it makes sure I know exactly which instance I'm trying to install this on, or I'm trying to transform from, or whatnot. It looks like that's been updated, so now I can come over here. Unfortunately, Studio, it's not flagging the record watcher, so I do need to close this out and reopen this. But I should see those changes that I just made to to-do helper. So we've got get to-dos and update to-do. And the nice thing about this is I can make the changes here or in Fluent as long as I do that transform. So let's say insert to do. We're just going to copy this. We're just going to do a generic insert. Okay, so now I made a change in the instance, and I need to get that back down to here. First off, I'm going to say, okay, well, I want to save the change that I made before, so that way I'm committing things as I go, and if I need to revert something, I can, because I am using Git. So I'm going to go ahead and git add star, git status, commit -m, and I can just do my message. Oftentimes, for the team that I'm on, we'll have JIRAs that are associated with our updates, and so we just put the JIRA num in there, along with then updated script include to have update to do method. Okay, we're going to go ahead and push that. And one of the key things about this, though, is your development process has to change a little bit, because now I want to keep those incremental changes over time. I don't want to just go build 50 million things within the instance. I mean, you can, that's okay, and that's really up to your team, and it's going to take you a while to get there. So don't feel like you have to do all of this at the same time. But the middle ground there, or the best that I've seen, is being able to update certain things and then commit those changes over time. So now I'm going to do a transform. And that'll pull the change down that I made in the instance to this same file. And the really nice thing is, boom, it updated the actual included file. So now I can say, okay, well, what just changed? Okay, my to-do helper server.js file just changed. Now again, this keeps getting generated, known bug, don't worry about it. But I'm going to go ahead and add it and keep it for now. So git status. All right, so I've got all of those. Git commit. And now if I come back over to my Git repository, I can see what has changed over time. I've got 5 commits. Okay, updated server.js. All right, what changed in here? Okay, all right. Oh, okay, so this was added in this particular commit. There we go. Now, this gets me to even one more step where we want to do peer reviews, right? So what I can do is git checkout -b, so I'm going to branch new updates. Okay, now I'm on a new updates branch. I'm going to go ahead and make my changes in the instance. It's just easier for me right now. I feel like doing it this way, right? So get to do. I'm going to copy this up here just to make my life easier. I'm going to do this. Now, of course, your best bet would be to do an if around this and check to make sure you actually got it and all that. But for our purposes right now, I'm just going to return the to-do, assuming I got it. But you never would actually want to do that in production, which is great because what I can do now is do another transform. It'll pull that change down. All right, I'm going to go get status. Okay, so that changed, good. Add star, get commit, added get to do method. I'm going to push that. Oh, but I don't have my branch set up yet on my remote. So I'm going to have to just copy this, put it here, and it'll push and it'll create that branch in Git for me. All right, so it pushed that, and look at that. It's asking me, do I want to create a pull request? Well, I would absolutely love to. So we're going to go over, we're going to come in here. I'm going to create a pull request because I want to get this into the main branch. Added the method to get to-dos. We can see here, it's going to show me what those changes are. All right, there's my get to-do method. Create that pull request. And then now I can have others peer review this and they could tell me, hey, let's look at the files changed. Oh, hey, you should do an if around this to ensure we have gotten the object before returning it. Start my review. And then now I can go back, I can pull this branch, make my updates, re-push to this branch, and iterate on that as needed. And I can see everything just as I would in normal software development. This is just one of the processes that using the SDK really has changed the way that we do development. And I didn't really move to anything too outrageous here, right? I'm still just using a script include. I'm using a little bit of Fluent just in this script include definition. But then it allows me to do what's really nice and get that JavaScript out into an actual JS file in order to be able to track that over time. And then in the next video that I'm going to put out for this, we're actually going to show how we can test this script include outside of the ServiceNow platform. That's right. So in the next video, I'm going to show you a library that I'll be making public. I would love input from the ecosystem to help with that particular library, but we've created a mock library as well as a setup for that mock library so we can create JEST unit tests and unit test our actual script includes. Using JS modules, which would be a server file on here, is going to be another step that we're going to want to go to, potentially. But there's some caveats to that and catches that we'll talk about in a little bit as well. But I want to get this video out, so I'm going to wrap this one up now. I just want to say that the key thing about this is that, number one, you do need to be using scoped applications to do this. But the nice thing with the way that this works with turning off runtime access tracking and setting up a scoped application like this is that you can do that incrementally. You can do that in little bits and pieces instead of creating those new pieces in global. I'm going to do another discussion here, which is going to be less codey, but about how do you organize and create those scoped applications? How big should they be or small? What we should put inside them? But ultimately, any change that you go and have to create, any object that you go and have to create, a table, a script include, a business rule, anything, a flow, all of those things can then be inside of a scoped application, and you can use the SDK to pull that down, store it in Git, so that way you can incrementally do those changes and view those changes over time. And the nice thing now too is that with that branch that I just created, if I wasn't ready to do that pull request yet, I have that branch of my code, but it isn't affecting our main branch. So someone else who maybe does get done with their functionality first could push to that main branch. We could push that to the instance, overriding what I'm doing here, then publish that if we wanted to, or push it directly using the SDK to the test instance. And then I could reinstall my updates that I want to continue to work on. It's not perfect. I don't think we're going to find a perfect solution right now, but we're getting to the point where we can really use this in a way that can scale out. And again, I've seen a lot of discussions with pipelines and how you can do DevOps and all this stuff. There's a lot of apps out there that talk about that, and that's okay. If you want to use those, that's totally great. But my point here is that you can easily use the SDK to pull your scoped applications, use it to just push your scoped application to Git and to other ServiceNow instances in very little time and overhead. And you don't actually have to change your development process really at all if you don't want to. In that way, here I showed that we created and updated this script include in Fluent, but we could just as easily use that transform method on the SDK to pull our app just on a regular basis and store it in Git. And we don't really have to do any of that if we don't want to. But I think that this is a turning point in our usage of the SDK, because being able to use JavaScript files in this way, and this will work right here in this Fluent file, just as an aside, where the now.include can work for any JavaScript file, any HTML file. It can work for any file type, really. So you could create a UI page and pull that HTML out and put it into a separate file, and then do a now.include to include that HTML. You can do this for a business rule. You can do this for any file type, really. Thank you all for your time. Have a wonderful day and keep working.